Do you have any idea what you've just done? The voice ripped through the Langford dining hall, sharp as crystal shattering. Red wine dripped from the chandelier's reflection, pooling beneath the feet of a trembling maid, whose hands still held the empty bottle. The room was so silent you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Every eye in the opulent dining chamber, lined with marble columns and a 10-foot oil painting of the Langford ancestors, was locked on one woman. Amara Hayes. Her gray uniform clung to her body, now streaked with crimson. A single drop of wine slid down her cheek, mingling with the tears she refused to let fall. Across from her stood Juliet Langford, golden hair shimmering under the chandelier's light, her designer dress spotless except for one damp sleeve. She held her wine glass loosely, her lips curved in a smirk that belonged to someone who'd never been told no. "Clumsy girl," Juliet murmured, her tone honeyed but deadly. "You think you can serve my guests like that? This isn't a diner in wherever you're from, Juliet." The warning came from Ethan Cho, seated across the table. His dark eyes were low, unreadable, but his hand had tightened around his glass stem. Juliet ignored him. She looked at Amara as if examining something less than human. "I asked you to pour carefully, and now my dress—" She stopped, smiled. Then, slowly, she raised her glass again, and before anyone could react, she tipped it forward. Red spilled in a cruel cascade down Amara's head, soaking her hair, staining her collar, dripping onto the polished oak floor. Gasps filled the room. Someone's fork clattered onto a plate. Amara's breath hitched. For a heartbeat, she froze completely, like her body had turned to glass. But when she lifted her eyes, they weren't filled with rage. They were calm, wounded, human. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "It won't happen again." That quiet, broken dignity made the moment even heavier. Charles Langford, seated at the head of the table, cleared his throat. "Juliet," he said in his low, warning tone. "Enough." But Juliet just flicked her wrist, dismissive. "Oh, please, Father. If she can't handle a little spill, she shouldn't be here. We pay them enough to clean up after themselves." Ethan's chair scraped back sharply. The sound echoed. "That's enough," he said. Not loudly, but with a force that made the whole table turn toward him. His face was unreadable, but his voice trembled slightly with restrained anger. "You just embarrassed a human being. Not a servant. Not your toy. A person." Juliet's smile faltered for a moment. Charles exhaled, long and slow. "Let's keep emotions out of tonight," he said, attempting to reclaim the room. "We have a business to discuss." But the atmosphere had curdled. Amara gathered the shards of her composure, bowed slightly, and turned to leave. Her shoes squeaked faintly on the marble as she stepped away, her uniform dripping red behind her like a silent trail of blood. Outside the dining room, she stopped near the service hall and pressed her hands against the counter. The world blurred. Her chest rose and fell rapidly. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. Soft, tender, from years ago. "Dignity, Amara. They can take your job, your peace, your pride, but never your dignity. You decide who you are when they try to break you." She swallowed hard, forcing her breathing to slow. Back inside, Ethan turned toward Juliet. "I'll be in touch about the deal," he said quietly. Charles frowned. "Ethan, we were just—" But Ethan was already standing. "Mr. Langford, I don't mix business with cruelty. Not anymore." He nodded once and left the room, his expression cold, but his eyes heavy with something like regret. The door shut behind him. Juliet laughed nervously. He's overreacting. It was just what? Charles snapped. Cheetah scene. His voice boomed, shattering his usual restraint. You humiliated that girl in front of my guest. A guest whose company could have secured our entire portfolio for the next decade. Juliet froze. She hadn't seen her father angry in years. Not like this. Clean yourself up, he cut in. And pray he calls back tomorrow. The silence that followed was suffocating. Downstairs in the staff quarters, Amara sat on a bench, wringing her soaked apron. The red stains wouldn't come out, no matter how much she scrubbed. Hey, murmured Rosa, the head housekeeper, kneeling beside her. You did nothing wrong, sweetie. I saw everything. Amara shook her head. It doesn't matter. They'll let me go. They always do. Rosa's eyes softened. Sometimes the world punishes the wrong people first. But don't lose that calm of yours. It's power they can't touch. Amara nodded faintly, though her chest still ached. Outside, the rain began to fall, soft, steady, cleansing. Hours later, upstairs in the Langford study, Charles poured himself a whiskey. Juliet stood at the window, watching lightning flash across the city skyline. She'll forget it by tomorrow, Juliet muttered. These people always do. But when her father didn't respond, she turned. He was scrolling through his phone. His expression turned to stone. What? She asked. He looked up slowly. Someone filmed it. Juliet's pulse quickened. What filmed what? The dinner. The wine? Her throat went dry. You can't be serious. It's online. His voice broke into a low, disbelieving growl. It's everywhere. He turned the screen toward her, and there, framed in 100 camera angles, was Juliet Langford, the billionaire's daughter, pouring wine onto her maid's head while the world gasped in horror. The caption read, "This is how the elite treat the people who serve them." Juliet's face drained of color. In the background of the clip, you could even hear Amara's trembling voice. I'm sorry, ma'am. And the internet had already chosen its side. That night, Amara sat alone in her tiny apartment, unaware that her face, dignified, calm, tear-streaked, was being shared across the world. She didn't know yet that her silence had spoken louder than Juliet's cruelty. She didn't know that this was only the beginning. But in that moment, as thunder rolled outside and her hands clutched the rosary her mother once held, she whispered to the empty room, I forgive you, but the world won't. You've gone viral. Amara. The words came softly through the phone, but to Amara, they felt like thunder rolling through her quiet apartment. It was Rosa's voice. Warm. Shaken. What do you mean? Viral, Amara asked, her brow furrowing as she balanced the phone between her shoulder and cheek. Her tiny apartment smelled faintly of coffee and rain. She hadn't slept. The uniform, her only one, hung damp by the heater, still faintly red from last night's humiliation. Rosa hesitated. Someone filmed what Juliet did. It's all over the internet. News sites, Twitter, TikTok. Everyone's talking about it. Amara froze. Talking about what? Rosa sighed. About you. The way you handled it. People are calling you the maid who didn't bow. They're saying you looked like you were the only real lady in that room. Amara's knees weakened. She sat down slowly, her heart pounding. Across town, in the Langford penthouse, Panic had erupted like wildfire. Juliet sat on the edge of her father's leather sofa, staring at her phone as millions of notifications exploded across the screen. Langford cruelty. Justice for Amara. Wine and dignity every post. Every video clip, every comment tore deeper into her polished image. "She's trending in 22 countries," muttered Charles, pacing by the window, phone pressed to his ear. "I don't care if she was rude. This is a PR disaster. Get the legal team, get a statement drafted, now!" Juliet's voice quivered. "Father, it was just a mistake. A stupid moment. Why are they acting like I'm a monster?" Charles slammed his palm onto the marble counter. "Because, Juliet, you poured wine on a maid's head. On camera, and now Ethan's company has frozen the merger." She blinked. "Frozen?" "Effective immediately." His voice was shaking now. "That's $2.4 billion in limbo because you couldn't control your temper for 10 seconds. Juliet stood, her chest tightening. "But Ethan wouldn't. He can't just—" "Oh, he can," Charles snapped. And he did. He turned toward her, and for the first time, she saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Fear. "Do you realize what this means for our stock? For the board? For me?" Juliet's lips parted, but no words came. The gravity of what she'd done began to sink in. Not as guilt yet, but as loss. Meanwhile, Amara's life was turning upside down. Her phone, once silent for days at a time, now buzzed nonstop. Journalists, bloggers, activists, offers, apologies, strangers sending money to her old college fund link that had been dug up by someone online. When she stepped outside to get groceries, people recognized her. A woman stopped her in the rain and said softly, "You didn't deserve that. My grandmother cleaned for people like them. She'd be proud of you." Amara smiled politely, though her eyes were tired. She didn't feel proud. She felt exposed. In her chest, confusion and sadness swirled together. She hadn't wanted revenge. She hadn't wanted fame. She had just wanted to work, to send Malik the next semester's tuition, to stay unseen. Now, the world wouldn't stop looking. That afternoon, a knock came at her door. When she opened it, she froze. Standing in the narrow hallway was Ethan Cho. He was wearing a simple gray coat, the rain glistening on his shoulders. His expression was unreadable, somewhere between regret and quiet admiration. "Miss Hayes," he said softly, bowing his head slightly. "I owe you an apology," Amara blinked. "For what, sir?" "For not stopping it sooner." His words landed heavy. His gaze met hers, and for a moment, the world outside, the rain, the sirens, the noise, disappeared. "You shouldn't have had to face that alone," he continued, "and you definitely shouldn't have lost your job over it." Amara lowered her eyes. "It's all right. It's not the first time I've been reminded of where I stand." Ethan's brow furrowed. "That's not where you stand. That's where they put you." There was a quiet strength in his tone, something Amara hadn't heard in years. He hesitated, then handed her a sealed envelope. "Inside is a letter of reference. You deserve better work than scrubbing floors for people who don't see you. And if you ever need help rebuilding, I have a place for you at my company." Amara blinked in disbelief. "You'd hire me?" "I'd be lucky to," he said simply. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Gratitude burned behind her ribs. "Thank you," she whispered. Before leaving, Ethan paused at the door. "For what it's worth," he added, You showed more grace in 5 seconds than they've shown in their whole lives. And then he was gone. That night, Amara sat at her small table with the letter open in front of her. The words were simple but powerful. To whom it may concern, Amara Hayes has demonstrated professionalism, dignity, and empathy under circumstances that would break most people. She is a person of remarkable integrity. Ethan Cho, CEO, Cho Dynamics. Her hand trembled as she traced the ink. For the first time since her mother's death, Amara felt something bloom in her chest. Not hope exactly, something quieter, like the faint warmth of a sunrise after too many cold mornings. Across the city, Juliet was staring into her bathroom mirror. Her mascara had smeared, her hair uncurled, her reflection looking less like the polished heiress the world once admired, and more like a frightened woman who didn't recognize herself. Her phone buzzed again. Another headline, another loss. Her friends had stopped replying. Her fiancé hadn't called. Her father hadn't spoken to her in hours. On the counter, a wine glass sat half full. She looked at it with hollow eyes. Then, as if unable to stand the sight, she grabbed it and threw it against the mirror. Glass shattered, splintering her reflection into 1,000 pieces. For the first time in her life, Juliet Langford began to cry. Not the staged kind, not the practiced whimper, but the kind that comes from the terrifying realization that you've broken something you can't buy back. At the same hour, Amara's brother, Malik, called from college. "Amara, you're all over my feed," he said, half laughing, half amazed. "You're trending like Beyoncé." She chuckled weakly. "I wish I wasn't. Are you okay?" She hesitated. "I don't know," she admitted. "But maybe this is what change looks like. Messy, loud, unwanted, but needed." Malik was quiet for a moment. "Mom would be proud," he said softly. Amara's throat tightened. "I hope so." She glanced out her window then. Rain had stopped, and the city lights glimmered on the wet pavement like stars fallen to earth. She whispered to herself, almost like a prayer, "They tried to drown me in red, but I'll rise in white." And somewhere, in a high-rise office across town, Ethan Cho hit send on a company memo titled "Termination of Langford Partnership." The message would ripple through the business world within minutes. A family's empire was about to crumble because of one act of arrogance and one woman's quiet grace. "You cost us $2.4 billion. Charles Langford's roar echoed through the glass corridors of the Langford corporate tower, his voice trembling with fury and disbelief. Juliet flinched. She stood in her father's office, barefoot, pale, mascara smeared. The golden light of morning filtered through the skyscraper windows, but nothing could warm the chill in that room. "It was a dinner," she cried, her voice breaking. "You're acting like I destroyed the company." Charles slammed his fist on the desk. "You didn't just destroy a company, Juliet. You destroyed our name. Do you understand what that means?" The phone on his desk was lighting up nonstop. Shareholders, partners, journalists. Behind him, the city skyline looked like a kingdom slipping through his fingers. Juliet pressed her trembling hands against her temples. "I didn't mean for it to go that far. Intent doesn't matter anymore," he hissed. Ethan Cho's people leaked the termination notice. Every headline in the country says, "We're toxic. Our stock is down 17% since 8 a.m. Juliet's heart dropped. 17? Charles's voice cracked. 17. You have no idea what that does to us. To me. His shoulders sagged then, the anger giving way to something heavier. Disappointment. I built this empire from nothing after your mother died. And in one night, you've made us the face of arrogance in America. Juliet bit her lip until she tasted blood. Her father's words hit harder than any public backlash. She wanted to scream, to defend herself, but there was nothing left to say. Because deep down, she knew he was right. Meanwhile, in a modest cafe on the east side of the city, Amara Hayes sat alone at a corner table, a cup of tea steaming between her palms. The noise around her, the chatter, the clinking cups, felt distant, like she was floating somewhere else entirely. Her phone buzzed again. Dozens of messages, invitations to interviews, requests for brand endorsements, even a message from a talk show producer offering to fly her to New York. She hadn't replied to any of them. Instead, she scrolled to one unread message from an unknown number. From Ethan Choi. "Know this attention must be overwhelming. If you'd rather stay off the radar, I can help you manage the PR. I just want you to have control over your story." Amara stared at the words for a long moment. Then she typed back slowly, "My story isn't about them. It's about not losing myself because of them." He replied almost instantly, "That's exactly why people are listening." Amara smiled faintly. At that same moment, across the ocean, media outlets were already dissecting the story. BBC, Langford Empire faces major loss after public humiliation, scandal business, insider, 2.4B, deal collapses over viral dinner, video social sphere, the maid who stayed silent. Amara Hayes becomes symbol of dignity. Every outlet contrasted two faces, Juliet's sneering expression mid-pour, and Amara's tear-bright but steady eyes. Two women, one drunk on power, one anchored in grace, and for the first time, the world wasn't siding with wealth. Later that afternoon, Ethan's assistant entered his office. "Sir, the Langford's PR team reached out again," she said. "They're requesting a private meeting to discuss reopening the deal. Charles Langford is offering full media transparency and compensation." Ethan didn't look up from his laptop. "Tell them no," the assistant hesitated. "Sir, 2.4 billion is—" "I don't care," he interrupted, his tone cold but calm. "Money doesn't clean blood off marble." He finally looked up, eyes fixed on the rain-spattered window. "When I was a kid," he said quietly, "my mother cleaned houses too. People like them. I used to wait in the car while she begged for extra hours. They never even looked at her. I saw the way they made her feel invisible. I promised myself I'd never stand on the same side as people like that." The assistant nodded softly. "Understood, sir." That evening, Amara walked home with a grocery bag in her arms, her mind heavy but clear. The city felt different now, like every glance lingered too long. Every whisper carried her name. When she reached her apartment door, a folded piece of paper lay on the floor. She picked it up, frowning. It was an envelope with her name scrawled on the front. No address, no stamp. Inside was a note, handwritten in looping cursive. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I can't sleep without asking for it. Please meet me tomorrow at the fountain in Lincoln Park. J.L." Amara's breath caught. Juliet Langford. For a long time, she just stood there, staring at the note, unsure whether to burn it or answer it. Her hands trembled slightly. Not with fear, but with something deeper. The question of whether grace could coexist with justice. The next morning, the Langford mansion was quieter than a tomb. Reporters had camped outside the gates. The staff had dwindled. Even Charles stayed locked in his office, refusing to face the fallout. Juliet sat by her window, wrapped in a blanket, staring out at the gray sky. Her phone was filled with hate mail and death threats. Her reflection in the glass looked foreign. She whispered to no one, "How did I become this person?" There was no answer, so she slipped on sunglasses, tied her hair back, and left the house for the first time in days. Lincoln Park was damp with last night's rain. The morning fog curled around the fountains like smoke. Amara stood near the water's edge, her dark curls down for the first time, her plain beige coat contrasting against the silver world around her. She wasn't sure why she'd come. Curiosity, maybe, or closure. Then, across the walkway, she saw Juliet. Her once perfect posture was gone. She looked small, uncertain, her steps hesitant. She walked toward Amara, eyes red and swollen. When they were a few feet apart, Juliet stopped. "I didn't think you'd come," she said softly. Amara studied her for a moment, then spoke with calm restraint. "Neither did I." Juliet's lips quivered. "I'm sorry." 2 words. Fragile, trembling, barely audible over the sound of the fountain. Amara didn't respond. The silence pressed between them like glass. Juliet's tears broke free. "I don't know why I did it. I was angry. I thought—" "You thought I wouldn't fight back," Amara said gently, finishing her sentence for her. "You thought people like me don't matter." Juliet nodded helplessly. Amara looked at her, not with vengeance, but with a kind of tired understanding. "You humiliated me in front of the world, and now the world is humiliating you. Does it feel like justice?" Juliet shook her head, sobbing. "No, it feels like punishment. And I don't know if I deserve forgiveness." Amara's voice softened. "Forgiveness isn't about deserving." Juliet blinked through her tears. "Then why are you here?" Amara looked out at the fountain, her reflection shimmering beside Juliet's. "Because someone has to stop the cycle. I won't become what hurt me." A pause. The faint sound of pigeons, the ripple of water. Juliet whispered, "I'm sorry." Again, but this time it wasn't for the cameras. It was real, and Amara, after a long breath, nodded. "Then let that be enough for today." Juliet covered her face with shaking hands. For the first time, the heiress broke, not out of shame, but out of realization. The world around them kept moving. But for those few moments, time itself seemed to pause. Far away in his office, Ethan received a notification from the news. Langford heiress seen in tears, meets former maid for private reconciliation. He smiled faintly. "Good," he murmured. "Maybe now they'll learn." But he had no idea how far the fallout would still reach. Because while the world was healing one wound, the empire behind the Langford name was about to collapse completely. And this time, no apology could save it. "The board wants your resignation." "Charles." The words came like a hammer through glass, delivered by a man Charles Langford had once mentored, his own chief financial officer. Charles stood behind his massive mahogany desk, the skyline of New York glittering behind him like a crown he could no longer wear. His hand tightened around a crystal tumbler of scotch. He didn't turn around. "They can't fire me from my own company," the CFO sighed. "They can, sir. And they will. After the deal collapse and the PR nightmare, they've lost confidence. The investors want someone with a cleaner image." Their words, not mine. Charles finally turned. his sharp features gaunt under the fluorescent light. The room smelled faintly of whiskey and rain. A cleaner image, he repeated bitterly. You mean someone who hasn't raised a spoiled child to destroy everything he built? The CFO's expression softened. Juliet didn't mean for this to happen. Oh, she meant every second of it, Charles growled. But I let her. I made her this way. That's on me. He looked out the window at the city he'd once ruled. Power makes fools of all of us, especially when we think we deserve it. Across the city, Juliet sat in her car outside a community shelter. Her sunglasses hid her swollen eyes, but she couldn't hide the tremor in her hands. She had been driving aimlessly for hours after her meeting with Amara. Something inside her had cracked wide open that morning. The guilt, the shame, the disbelief that her world had come undone because of one cruel impulse. Now, for reasons she couldn't explain, she'd ended up here. Children's laughter echoed faintly from inside the shelter. Volunteers moved in and out with boxes of food, and among them, standing tall in a plain white shirt, clipboard in hand, was Amara Hayes. Juliet froze. For a long time, she just watched from the car. Amara was smiling at a young boy, crouching to fix his shoelace before helping him carry a food bag. The light caught her face just right. And for a fleeting moment, Juliet saw it. What the world saw in her. Grace. Quiet strength. The kind of dignity money couldn't buy. Tears blurred Juliet's vision. She opened her car door and stepped out. Inside, Amara was organizing supplies when she heard the shuffle of heels behind her. She turned, and her breath caught. Juliet stood there awkwardly, hands clenched, eyes red. Juliet, Amara said carefully. What are you doing here? I wanted to help, Juliet murmured. I don't know where else to go. The volunteers nearby froze, recognizing the disgraced heiress. The tension in the air was heavy, like a string pulled too tight. Amara hesitated. Then she sighed softly. There's always room to help. She handed Juliet a box of canned goods. Start with this, Juliet blinked. You're serious? Amara nodded. If you're really sorry, prove it. Juliet swallowed hard, nodded once, and took the box. Her manicured hands trembled as she carried it to the supply rack. The box was heavier than she expected. For the first time, she understood what labor felt like. The quiet humility of serving without recognition. By the end of the day, her hair was damp, her clothes wrinkled, her arms sore. Yet she felt lighter than she had in weeks. Amara approached her, offering a bottle of water. Not as easy as it looks, huh? Juliet let out a weak laugh. No, it's grounding, Amara smiled faintly. Good. For a moment, they stood there. Two women from worlds that never should have crossed, bound now by consequence and something dangerously close to understanding. Juliet's voice softened. I don't deserve your kindness. Amara looked away. Maybe not. But kindness isn't about who deserves it. Juliet bit her lip, eyes brimming again. You're not what I thought you were. Amara tilted her head. And what did you think I was? Juliet's voice cracked. Someone I could pour wine on and walk away from. The confession hung in the air, raw, trembling. Amara didn't respond. She didn't need to, because sometimes silence was the loudest answer. That evening, the shelter lights dimmed. Amara walked Juliet to her car. The night air was cool, the city distant hum behind them. Juliet, Amara said quietly, you'll have to face what you've done, publicly. Not for me, but for everyone watching you. People like you set examples, even when you fail. Juliet nodded. I know. I've been thinking about that. I want to apologize. To you, to the staff, to the world. Not with a statement. In person. Amara's gaze softened. That takes courage. Juliet looked up at the night sky. Maybe I'm learning it from the right person this time. They shared a quiet, unexpected smile. Meanwhile, in the corporate tower, chaos had reached a fever pitch. Reporters swarmed the lobby, investors demanded refunds, and Charles sat alone in his office, staring at a framed photo of his late wife. He whispered into the silence, "You'd hate who I've become." His phone buzzed, an incoming call from Juliet. He hesitated before answering. "Father," her voice came, steady but gentle. "I'm going to do something tomorrow that might make things worse before they get better." He frowned. "What do you mean?" "I'm holding a press conference. I'm going to apologize publicly. Not the kind your lawyers write, the kind that's real." "Juliet," he warned. "The damage control team said, I don't care what they said," she interrupted. "This isn't about saving face anymore. It's about doing what's right." Charles fell silent. There was something new in her tone. Resolve, humility, maybe even strength. After a long pause, he said quietly, "Do what you must." When he hung up, a single tear slid down his cheek. He hadn't cried in 20 years. The next morning, the world gathered again, this time outside the Langford Tower. Dozens of cameras lined the street, the press buzzing with anticipation. Juliet stepped onto the stage, her hands shaking slightly, no makeup, no jewelry, just a white blouse, plain slacks, and trembling honesty. Flashes erupted. She took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the crowd, and stopped when she saw Amara at the back. Standing quietly in the audience, Juliet began to speak. "I'm not here as a Langford executive. I'm here as a woman who forgot what respect meant." The murmurs quieted. "A few weeks ago, I humiliated someone who had done nothing but serve with kindness. And I did it because I thought power made me untouchable. I was wrong. I was cruel. And I am so, so sorry." The air thickened with emotion. Juliet's voice cracked, but she continued. "My family lost a $2.4 billion deal. But what I lost that night was far greater. My integrity. And I won't get it back by pretending. The only reason I can stand here at all is because the woman I hurt showed me more grace than I ever showed anyone." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Juliet looked toward Amara, tears in her eyes. "Amara Hayes," she said softly. "Thank you for not hating me when you had every reason to." A silence so deep it almost hummed filled the plaza. Then, to everyone's shock, Amara stepped forward. She walked up to the podium, her calm presence grounding the chaos of cameras and whispers. She didn't speak to humiliate or grandstand. She just placed a gentle hand on Juliet's trembling shoulder and said, in a voice that reached every corner of the square, "The apology is accepted, but let's make sure it means something." The crowd erupted, not in applause, but in a collective breath of awe. In that moment, forgiveness didn't look like weakness. It looked like power, and every camera caught it. From his office window above, Charles Langford watched through tear-blurred eyes as his daughter embraced the woman she once humiliated. For the first time in years, he whispered something that sounded like a prayer. And far away, Ethan Cho turned off the news feed, leaned back in his chair, and smiled quietly to himself. "Now that," he murmured, "is what real leadership looks like." But the story wasn't over yet, because what happens after forgiveness is what defines whether redemption is real. The video went viral overnight. Juliet Langford's trembling voice and Amara Hayes' quiet grace replayed on millions of screens across the world. News anchors called it the Redemption Press Conference. Social media lit up with disbelief. Some called it performative. Others called it brave. But one thing was certain. Everyone was watching. Inside the shelter the next morning, Amara tried to drown out the noise. Reporters camped outside, volunteers whispered, and her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. She didn't want fame. She wanted peace, but the world had other plans. "Ms. Hayes!" a journalist shouted as she stepped outside with donation boxes. "How does it feel to be the woman who humbled the Langfords?" Amara paused, her expression calm but firm. "It's not about humbling anyone," she said. "It's about reminding people that kindness should never be conditional." The journalist scribbled her words down furiously. Amara walked away before they could ask more. She didn't see Juliet's black sedan parked across the street, engine idling quietly. Inside the car, Juliet watched her, eyes glassy, heart pounding. She'd been there for almost an hour, trying to gather the courage to step out. When she finally did, she didn't wear designer sunglasses or carry a handbag, just a notebook and guilt. "Amara," Juliet called softly as she approached. Amara turned, wiping sweat from her brow. "Juliet, I didn't expect to see you here again so soon. I didn't come to make a scene," Juliet said quickly. "I came to ask if I can help again." Amara hesitated. Around them, volunteers exchanged wary looks, Juliet noticed. She looked down at her shoes, then held out the notebook. "I've been writing everything down. The things I've learned, the people I've met. I want to start a foundation, in your name." Amara blinked. "My name?" Juliet nodded. "The Hayes Fund, for domestic workers, education, health care, protection from exploitation. I want to put my inheritance to use for something that matters." Amara's lips parted slightly in surprise. "Juliet, that's too little, too late." Juliet finished softly. "Maybe, but it's what I can do now." Amara studied her for a long moment. Gone was the arrogant woman in silk dresses. Before her stood someone stripped bare, trembling with honesty. Finally, Amara smiled faintly. "If it helps even one woman, it's worth it." Juliet's shoulders shook with a quiet exhale of relief. "Thank you for trusting me." Amara looked skyward. "I'm not trusting you. I'm trusting that you've changed." Juliet nodded slowly. "Fair enough." Across town, Charles Langford sat in a conference room surrounded by grim-faced board members. The fallout had been brutal. Half their investors had withdrawn. The press was relentless, and Charles's own position hung by a thread. He listened as lawyers discussed damage control strategies, but his mind was elsewhere, on his daughter's face as she apologized, and on the maid who forgave her. Finally, he stood up, cutting through the noise. "Enough," he said quietly. The room fell silent. "I built this company on profit and power," he continued, "and I let it turn my family into people I barely recognize. My daughter may have lost us billions, but she gained something I couldn't buy back with all the money in the world." The board members shifted uncomfortably. Charles looked each of them in the eye. "From this day forward, Langford Industries will double wages for all service staff, provide scholarships for employees' families, and partner with the Hayes Fund." A collective gasp rippled across the table. "Sir?" That's financially reckless, one man protested. Charles turned sharply. No, what's reckless is thinking we can keep taking from the people who hold us up without giving back. For the first time in years, there was no arrogance in his tone, only conviction. And that was how the redemption began to spread. Weeks passed. Juliet and Amara met often, working side by side to launch the Hayes Fund. Their differences never fully vanished. Amara was practical, Juliet idealistic, but they learned to listen to each other. Juliet began visiting local communities, not as a benefactor, but as a student. She spoke to maids, gardeners, drivers, heard their stories, wrote them down, and one afternoon, while distributing care packages, she noticed a familiar face. The young black woman she'd once shouted at in the Langford mansion weeks ago. The one who'd witnessed the wine incident. The woman froze when she saw Juliet, but Juliet approached her quietly. "I remember you," Juliet said softly. "I owe you an apology, too." The woman folded her arms, skeptical. "You already did that on TV," Juliet shook her head. "That was for the world. This one's for you," she lowered her gaze. "You saw who I really was that night, and you saw who I pretended to be every other day. I'm sorry you had to work for someone like that." The woman studied her for a long moment, then finally nodded once. "Keep doing what you're doing," she said. "If it's real, you don't need my forgiveness. You'll earn it." Juliet smiled faintly. "That's fair." Amara watched from afar, a quiet warmth blooming in her chest. Later that evening, Amara sat with Ethan Cho in a small cafe. He was leaving for Seoul the next day, but had requested to see her one last time. "You know," he said with a gentle smile, "I've watched hundreds of companies rise and fall, but I've never seen a family fall and rise like this." Amara chuckled softly. "I didn't do it for them." Ethan leaned forward. "Maybe not, but you reminded them what humanity looks like when the cameras are off." She looked down at her tea. "I just did what was right." Ethan smiled. "Exactly, and that's what the world needed to see." He stood, slipping a small envelope onto the table. "That's for you. My personal donation to the Hayes Fund. Consider it an investment in dignity." Amara opened it after he left. Inside was a check, signed in quiet ink, for $2 million. She stared at it for a long moment, her eyes welling. Then she laughed softly to herself, shaking her head. The world was still full of injustice, but maybe, just maybe, it was learning. A few days later, at a small ceremony in a renovated community hall, the Hayes Fund for Workers' Dignity officially launched. Juliet stood at the podium, smiling nervously. Charles was in the front row, his once proud demeanor softened into something humbler, more human. Amara stood beside her, radiant and calm. As the cameras flashed, Juliet spoke, not for attention, but for purpose. "This foundation isn't about forgiveness. It's about fairness. My family's wealth came from the labor of people who never got thanked. Today, that changes." Applause erupted, not thunderous, but heartfelt. And when Juliet turned to Amara, she saw not the maid she once disrespected, but a woman whose strength had rebuilt her world. That night, as the event ended and the crowd dispersed, Amara walked alone under the soft glow of city lights. Juliet caught up to her. "I wanted to thank you again," Juliet said quietly. Amara smiled faintly. "You don't owe me thanks, Juliet. Just keep living like the person you're trying to be." Juliet nodded, tears glimmering in her eyes. I will. They stood there in silence for a moment, watching the city that had once divided them now feel just a little smaller. For the first time, they weren't maid and heiress. They were equals, two women who had learned, through fire and loss, that dignity isn't granted by status, but by how one treats the world when no one's watching. The next morning's headlines read, "From Scandal to Change, the Maid Who Inspired a Movement," and beneath it, a photo, Amara and Juliet, smiling side by side. Rain fell softly on the Langford estate that evening, the same marble mansion where, months ago, humiliation had poisoned a dinner table and pride had ruled every breath. But now the air was different, quiet, human. In the grand dining hall, the long mahogany table gleamed under low golden light. The crystal glasses were gone, the plates simple. The room that once held cold luxury now hosted warmth. A family gathering, small and unguarded. Charles Langford sat at the head of the table, silver hair neatly combed, eyes calmer than they'd been in years. His cane rested by his chair. Across from him sat Juliet, dressed simply in a cream blouse, her hair pulled back, and beside her, seated where once only elite guests had been allowed, was Amara Hayes. She looked elegant but humble, her dark skin luminous against the soft candlelight, her eyes full of quiet reflection. She wasn't a servant anymore. She was a guest of honor. The butler, an older man who'd served the family for 30 years, poured water into their glasses. His hands trembled slightly when he smiled at Amara. "Feels strange, doesn't it?" Charles said with a faint smile. Amara looked up. "What does?" "Sitting at this table," he said. "When I think of what happened here, and who I was back then," he trailed off, his voice breaking slightly. Juliet reached across, placing a gentle hand on her father's. "We can't change the past," she whispered. "But we can change the way it ends." Charles nodded, eyes glistening. He turned to Amara. "I've spent months trying to find words that could measure my gratitude, but none seem enough. You gave my daughter a conscience, and you gave me a second chance to be a decent man before I leave this world." Amara's throat tightened. "You don't owe me gratitude, Mr. Langford. Just keep giving dignity where it's due." He chuckled softly. "I plan to. Starting tonight," he gestured toward Juliet. "After the board's approval next week, Langford Industries will merge its new division with the Hayes Fund, under your direction, Amara, as a full partner." Amara blinked, stunned. "Partner? I can't accept that," Juliet smiled gently. "You already have, by earning it." For a long moment, Amara couldn't speak. Her eyes shimmered, her heart pounding with disbelief. All those years of scrubbing floors, being invisible, enduring quiet slights, and now she was being asked to lead, not as charity, but as choice. She swallowed hard. "Then I'll do it," she said finally. "But only if we remember who this is for. The people still waiting to be seen." Juliet nodded. Always. The next day, the rain cleared. The Langford gates, once symbols of separation, swung open to welcome the community. It was a small celebration. Local staff, neighbors, volunteers, and the first group of Hayes Fund scholarship recipients. Laughter filled the air. Children ran across the garden that had once felt forbidden. A banner read, "Dignity Day, in honor of those who serve." Amara moved through the crowd, greeting people with hugs, laughter, and words of encouragement. She didn't feel like a guest in someone else's world anymore. She belonged. Juliet found her by the fountain where they had first spoken months ago. The water shimmered under the sunlight. "You know," Juliet said, smiling, "this is where everything changed." Amara smirked. "You mean where you almost ruined my uniform?" Juliet laughed, cheeks reddening. "Yes, that." They both laughed until the tension melted into something gentle and familiar. Juliet's expression softened. "You could have walked away, Amara. You could have sued us, shamed us, destroyed us. But you didn't." Amara looked at the fountain. "Because hate is heavy, and I'd carried enough of it already." Juliet's eyes shimmered. "Do you ever regret forgiving me?" Amara thought for a moment. "No, because forgiveness wasn't for you. It was for me, to set myself free." Juliet nodded, her lips trembling. "Then I hope I've earned it." Amara smiled faintly. "You have." They stood in silence as the children's laughter echoed across the estate. That evening, as the celebration faded and the sky turned a bruised shade of purple, Amara walked through the empty hallways of the Langford mansion one last time. She paused by the spot near the dining table, the same spot where red wine had once dripped down her apron, hot with humiliation. Now, sunlight touched the floor where the stain had once been, clean, quiet, redeemed. Amara whispered under her breath, "It's done." Then she turned and walked out, closing the door softly behind her. Weeks later, Forbes published an article titled "The Billionaire's Fall That Started a Global Uprising." The story chronicled how Amara Hayes's act of grace had reshaped corporate ethics worldwide. Worker rights legislation was being debated in 3 countries, and the Hayes Fund had become one of the fastest-growing humanitarian organizations of the decade. When asked what inspired her to forgive, Amara's reply was quoted in bold at the article's end. "Because forgiveness doesn't erase the wound. It just stops it from defining you." 1 year later, the Langford mansion was no longer a private estate. It had been converted into a community leadership center. The once intimidating gates now bore a sign that read, "The Hayes House, a home for dignity." Inside, young women studied business, law, and social justice. On the walls hung portraits, not of billionaires, but of maids, cooks, and janitors whose courage had gone unnoticed. And in the corner of the main hall stood a glass display. Juliet's original press conference speech, framed beside a photograph of her and Amara smiling through tears. Below it, a small brass plaque read, "Grace began here." In the quiet garden behind the center, Amara often sat on a bench surrounded by lavender and jasmine. She liked to come there at dusk, when the city fell soft and golden. One evening, Juliet joined her with 2 cups of tea. "Still working too much?" Amara teased. Juliet chuckled. "Still saving the world one document at a time." "You?" Amara smiled. "Still cleaning up messes. Just bigger ones now." They both laughed gently, sipping tea in comfortable silence. Then Juliet turned serious. "Do you think people ever really change?" Amara looked out at the sunset. "Yes, when they finally see the humanity they ignored in others and find it in themselves." Juliet nodded slowly. "Then I guess I'm still changing," Amara smiled softly. "We all are." As the last light faded, a breeze rustled through the garden. The lavender swayed, and somewhere inside the center, a young woman read aloud from a leadership workbook Amara had written. Her voice carried faintly through the window. "Dignity is not something you're given. It's something you keep, no matter who tries to take it." Amara closed her eyes, listening. That sound, the voice of someone learning to stand tall, was her legacy. The rain, the humiliation, the injustice, all of it had led to this. A world just a little fairer than before. And as night settled in, Amara whispered to herself, almost like a prayer, "Grace wins every time."